I'll do this again if I get that warm of an introduction every time. Thank you for being here. I'm pleased to be able to introduce this program today, Atlanta, a city too busy to wait. As you may have noticed in programming, we have tried to bring you CEOs who are driving the Georgia economy. We've also tried to address issues that are front and center to your businesses and more importantly to the growth of the community. All with an eye towards giving you folks an opportunity to call each other up after the programs are over and continue the conversation. Today's program takes on both of those objectives. As you can tell, the title is a play on words of the famous tagline from Mayor Ivan Allen's administration from 1962 to 1970. As you remember, Mayor Allen was the only Southern elected official to endorse the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And over time, that tagline was used by both black and white leaders to define the relative social peace we had in Atlanta and to underscore our ongoing commitment to tranquility, social tranquility, and economic growth. So with that, in the model of Robert Woodruff, Egbert Perry and Larry Gellerstedt are known to be intentionally quiet leaders. They do what they can to stay out of the limelight. And these two men have been friends for the past 40 years. And as many of you already know, they come from very different backgrounds. One is a byproduct of Atlanta's business and social elite, grew up in Buckhead, while the other is an immigrant who says he didn't know he was poor until he moved to the United States. We're very proud of both of them. We're glad you're both here. Thank you. Our member, Egbert Perry, was born in Antigua and Barbuda, which is a small twin island in the nation in the Caribbean with a total population of less than 100,000 people. If you know Egbert's story, you know he won a scholarship to the U.S. to finish his last 2 years of high school before attending University of Pennsylvania, where he received an undergraduate degree in civil engineering and then graduate degrees in structural engineering, finance, and accounting. In January of 1980, 1 year after he graduated, while working for a large D.C. contracting firm, he was recruited to Atlanta by our own Herman Russell. By December, that very first year that he worked for Mr. Russell, at the tender age of 25, Mr. Russell put him in charge of all the company's construction operations. In 1993, after 13 years at H.J. Russell, Egbert founded the Integral Group, where he's chairman and CEO today. We were still in that 30-year trend of moving out of the inner city, the urban centers, into the suburbs. But Egbert and his partners saw an opportunity on the horizon, and so they set out on a mission to revitalize urban America, and more importantly, or as importantly, change the trajectory for the country's black and brown citizens. They introduced a new financing and development strategy that invited investors and consumers to reimagine what downtown living was like. The development and financing innovations that they came up with has been adopted and implemented over 250 times across the nation. In 2008, when our U.S. financial system was trying to melt down, Egbert was recruited to join the board of Fannie Mae, which of course is a $3.2 trillion financial institution and part of the core of the housing market in the U.S. After 5 years, he became chairman of the board and served in that capacity till the end of 2018. He's also served on numerous boards, including the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and the list goes on. Integral is now a 300-person company with developments and investments in more than 18 cities, a $2 billion development backlog, and a portfolio that stretches from San Francisco to Baltimore. That said, Integral's heart and soul and headquarters still reside here in Atlanta. So with that, Egbert, would you take the stage? Now, most of you probably know Larry Gellerstedt as well. And for those of us who grew up in Atlanta, Larry is one of the consummate Atlanta natives. Larry's father and mother were well-known and well-established leaders in Atlanta socially and in business circles. And after graduating from Chapel Hill, Larry followed his father's footsteps into Beers Construction in 1978. He would start out as an estimator and a project manager for the company and would eventually become the chairman and CEO, leading the company to annual revenues of more than $1.2 billion before a sale to a Swedish construction company called Skanska AB in 1994. After that, Larry would go on to become chairman and CEO of Atlanta Business Products, then joined Egbert at Integral as president and chief operating officer. Larry eventually started the Gellerstedt Group, an Atlanta-based private real estate owner, advisor, and development firm that specialized in multifamily urban residential projects, as well as construction management and build-to-suit services. In 2005, Cousins bought the Gellerstedt Group, and Larry was named president and CEO of Cousins in 2009. He spent much of his time, those first 2 years, working the company out of the Great Recession and rebuilding the portfolio. Larry became chairman of the board of Cousins in 2017 and retired in April of 2020. Larry's list of civic engagements, leadership, negotiations, contributions to our city is long and distinguished. Probably the best known is his engineering of the successful merger between Eggleston and Scottish Rite Children's Hospitals into CHOA. And Larry, we may get you on stage for a program on that one to give us some history. He's a trustee of the Robert Woodruff Foundation, serves on the corporate boards of Georgia Power, Brown and Brown Insurance, and United Distributor. He's also a chairman of Grady Memorial Hospital. Larry, come on up. More than 40 years ago, Egbert and Larry became good friends as young men in the construction business. And in their 20s, the two men understood that though they traveled very different paths and they saw the world through different lenses, that life had blessed them both. And they recognized that if by chance they were able to give themselves to the city, they should. And if they could help Atlanta grow, they should. And if they had an opportunity to make Atlanta a better place for all the citizens, they should. So today's presentation is a continuation of a pledge they made to each other and made to the city that they love a very long time ago. Today, they'd like to restart a civic conversation, a restatement of a commitment to Atlanta's civic and business leaders to help our city navigate the treacherous waters of social, civil, and economic growth. And like their predecessors of the 60s and the 70s, they're hoping the distinguished men and women in this room, the members of the Atlanta Rotary Club, will see an opportunity to lean in for their city and provide, once again, service above self. Gentlemen, thank you for your leadership. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Bill. It seems as though there should be no program. Larry and I should just get up and leave right now. We're on a high note. Can't get any higher than that. So Larry, I'm obviously you can tell from my southern accent, I'm the immigrant. But I met Larry here, and for those of you who don't know, every time you see Larry, distinguished as he may look, when I met him, he was known as Little Larry. He was the first individual I met outside of the Russell Company, January 7, 1980, when H.J. said, oh, let's go meet our partners, because one of the things on my list of responsibilities at Russell was I was going to be the project manager for a project called the Robert Woodruff Library over at the Atlanta University Center. So I was the project manager for that, and it was a Beers-Russell project. So I went over to Beers' office to meet Lawrence, and while H.J. and I were sitting in the lobby, H.J. said, while we're waiting for Lawrence, let me introduce you to this young man here. This is Little Larry. So that's how I know him. Y'all can call him that, too. But Larry, you were
Thanks,
here.
Egbert.
You're welcome. I'm sure you appreciate that. You were here when I came. So there was a history, there was an energy in Atlanta and so on that was somewhat seductive. And you were a part of that, not only involved, you were close enough to it to understand what exactly was happening. And it's probably worth sharing for the people in the room your perspective on what was going on in Atlanta in those days.
Yeah, well, listen, I just want to mention that, when we met in 1980, those of you all who know us at all know that what has happened over the 40-plus years is just as close of a personal friendship as I have in life. I can't speak for Egbert, but we, we were talking last week because Egbert and I, we've been talking about doing this for years, and I told Egbert getting ready to come down here, I normally am not nervous about public speaking, and I'm nervous today. Maria, I am. And that's because this is a topic that in the city that we love, that we've talked a lot about, but we hadn't only talked about it, we've experienced it together. And I think one of the reasons that Egbert and I's friendship is so close is if we were thrown together so often in life when you're meeting someone of a different race or belief, you're thrown together in a forum where that's the topic. Egbert and I were thrown together really in the combat trenches of building a project together. It wasn't white-black. It was, can we get the steel on time? Can we get this on budget? The friendship part grew out of a lot of hard work and years of a common purpose. And out of that became a trusting relationship that we could talk about race. And I could learn a lot about a different perspective on life. And I think Egbert hopefully learned a little bit about other different perspective on life. And out of that has grown as rich a friendship as anybody in this room. We've known each other as friends. We've known each other as granddads with very sick grandchildren. We've known each other as business partners, civic partners. The 2 years I worked with Egbert, boy, he had to put up with a lot. I was, I think, the only white guy in the firm. Maybe 2, 3. You know how white people exaggerate about race, but anyway, I just want to give that context. And I'm sort of nervous about talking about it because even though race is always a part of the conversation in Atlanta, to our strength, it's a tough topic to talk about. And I always want to make sure that I caveat that I hope nothing I say acts like I've got anything figured out or that I know. I don't know. I just know what my own experiences have been. And I try to continue to learn. But I want to make sure I put that caveat out. I'm not here to preach to anybody and act like you need to do this or that, because I hope you trust me on that caveat. But anyway, I grew up here. I was born in 1956. My mom and dad were very active civically. I would say they were progressive for the time. So as I grew up in the 60s, my dad was a part of a group that actually started in the 60s, not the 70s, called the Atlanta Action Forum. And what I really think the lesson, not to go back about history too much, but the lesson is that if you look at before civil rights, Atlanta was smaller than all our southeastern neighbors. I think people forget that. Nashville, Birmingham, Charlotte, we were not the big gorilla, and I would argue that civil rights is one of the main springboards of how our city came out different during that stressful period, and it's still a fundamental strength. Why do you think you hear these big companies like Microsoft and others come in here? It's the diversity of the workforce. That's a springboard out of a very different approach, not perfect, that Atlanta took. How did that happen? Well, I think if you look back in history, it really happened for pretty simple reasons, is that Atlanta, you had businesses that, unlike some of our other cities, it wasn't an industrial base. Delta Airlines needed Atlanta to grow and be a beacon for the whole country. Coca-Cola needed Atlanta to grow and be a beacon for the whole world. The banks needed Atlanta to grow. It wasn't protecting, a turf, steel, or whatever that allowed you to look inward. So there was a group of leaders, black and white, that met every Saturday morning in Atlanta called Action Forum. And as I would hear about that growing up and then as I became a teenager, what I heard was that those leaders would come together and during those Saturday morning meetings, they argued vehemently. They disagreed vehemently on 80% of the topics that they talked about. But what they found through getting to know each other as individuals is there was 20%, 25% that overlapped that they both felt passionately about. And that was that Atlanta was not going to move forward by fighting out its racial issues on the street with fire and gunfire and all the things that were happening in our neighbors. And we largely came through that period without that, but that took courage. That took a lot of courage on both sides. But they would meet, and their focus on that commonality was not the 80% we disagree on. It was what can we do to get through the next week or 2 weeks. That's as far as you could look out. And it might be as simple as, you know, we need to make sure that the police don't do this, but are here. It may be as simple as, you know, this group needs this kind of support, or can we influence the paper to put out something that highlights this issue? That type of dialogue. But like Egbert and I, out of that became relationships. And then when you have a relationship, then what you can talk about expands. And then you can start hearing like, oh, when you do that, let me tell you how I hear it. And you don't get defensive, like, what's your problem? You know, you hear it and you go, gosh, you're my friend. You know, if, you know, wearing Red Sox, you know, means to you something that it doesn't mean to me, well, what's the big deal? I just won't wear Red Sox anymore. I remember when I worked for Egbert, one of his partners, one of my first days, it was a hot summer day, and came into my office and, you know, I'd wore a good, cool seersucker suit. And came in and said, let me tell you what I see when you wear that seersucker suit. And I think if Egbert and I hadn't had that friendship, then I would have reacted like, what is your problem? You know, you come in here the first day and you jump on, and, you know, through a lot of button heads and trust, I heard that is, man, I don't know if Goodwill needs any seersucker suits, but that is where that baby is headed, and grew from it. So what I think is, does Atlanta get the Olympics without our civil rights history? Heck no. Come on. We've got this incredible history that has led to a lot of good things, but it's left a heck of a lot unfinished. What Egbert and I want to talk about today is, I don't think we can say the quote Atlanta way just genetically continues on. And what we worry about in today's society, and Atlanta's got to lead. See, I get overwhelmed thinking of all the global problems. You know, being a contractor by root, I'm better at focusing on, well, let's deal with one of the global problems here locally and see if we can set an example. That's how my DNA works. What makes it so that people can learn other people's opinions in a safe setting and respect, and focus on the 20% they agree on, and not try to kill each other on the 80% that they don't?
So Larry, so let's take.
Go, man.
Yeah.
Light it up.
So Larry gave you his opening remarks. He said, he's not here to preach, and I'm not here to preach either. He's not here to preach, and so on. I have to start by preemptively apologizing. I always feel it necessary to do that. Invariably, something I say will offend, and the intent is not to offend if it stops you from hearing. So I don't want you to be offended by anything I say, but I come to this with a very, very, very different perspective. And Larry's right. We found the 20%. We built a friendship around the 20%, and now we can talk about 100% of the topics. Very unusual. I do not have that relationship with all of you in here. So since it takes time to build that, allow me to make a few mistakes. But here's the world I look through. And you see me up here and you think I belong up here. It's not where you are that matters, it's what you overcome to get there. Because that's what ultimately defines you, and that's how you should evaluate people. If you're born here and you stay here, then you haven't really done anything. If you're born in these conditions and you do this, you've achieved something because you've overcome adversity and so on. And so I see the world as a world that really sucks for black people. I don't wear that chip on my shoulder too heavily, but at the core, it's the world I know. If you think about how the world was constructed over the last 500 years, it started with that horrible, most outrageous human trafficking crime called the transatlantic slave trade. And it meant that if you were black, you were going to have a certain life experience in this new world. Very different from if you were white. And anywhere around the globe you go, you find the remnants of that history. It wasn't accidental, it was intentional, and it was about creating heaven and hell. That's what we do well. Everybody's trying to create their heaven, sometimes by or while creating hell for others. And you fast forward generation after generation after generation for 500 years, and it's just part of the DNA of the world we live in. So when you see polls and you can't understand why one group of people vote 90 to 10 one way and the other group see it 10 and 90, and you say, well, what the hell are they looking at? You have to respect the fact that they're experiencing the world very differently from the way you experience it. The thing about Larry and my friendship is Larry never tried to tell me that the world I saw, the way I related to the world, wasn't real. He didn't try to put his view on it with me. We both respected the fact that we came at it differently. But we both arrived in a world that was constructed a certain way. And if we wanted to change that world, we needed to understand the past, but we need to deal with the reality today and try to shape a future for tomorrow. We don't do that well in society. When we run into a problem, the first thing we do is we retreat to our neck of the woods, we try to wall ourselves off and create our little heaven, and leave hell outside. That's how we react to most of the challenges we have. And what we're saying is, it's about time. Larry just said, Atlanta wouldn't have gotten the Olympics. People didn't come to the Olympics because Billy Payne and Andy Young made a nice speech. They came because there was a perception that in this really screwed up world, that there was this little city that somehow found a way to tackle tough issues, join hands, find that 20%, and build a future that everybody aspired to emulate. So Atlanta was kind of like that little beacon. Ironically, today, most of the battles we fight are to destroy that beacon. We've lost our way in terms of coming together and trying to decide how to build that healthy, wholesome, more nurturing community for everybody. And we very quickly retreat to them and us and so on. So don't be mistaken, and we're going to come at the end of this with really asking you to get inside of this conversation. But don't be mistaken. I am sitting up here in a suit and so on, but I have had my immigrant or not. When that guy drives down the street, he doesn't know I'm an immigrant. What he sees first and foremost is I'm a black man. I've stood there, been picked up for murder in New York City, locked up in jail for about 5 or 6 hours, with two of my buddies. All of us were black until they found the three white Spanish-speaking guys that actually did something, and then they let us off. I think about that day all the time, that if they hadn't found those guys, we would have been the ones, and my life would have been different. I've been picked up for rape, mugging. I've been in paddy wagon, locked up, handcuffed, put in the police lineup for stuff just from walking on the street while black. I've stared down the police gun barrel several times and warned by my buddy, don't move suddenly or you're going to be a justifiable homicide. So I don't have any misconceptions about this world. I'm not trying to tell you or convince you that there is that world out there, because if I told my mother that I had been picked up by police, my mother would beat the hell out of me, because she would think you must have done something wrong. Because in the Antigua she grew up in, police upheld the law. They didn't abuse you. And therefore, if they picked you up for something, you should not have been doing it. And so she would beat me for that. I could never communicate that to her. So I could never communicate to many of you sitting down there that life is what life really is for me. And I'm privileged. So I think about all the people who aren't as privileged, that are in less attractive and healthy environments, and therefore are subjected to much, much, much worse than I have been. So I want you to understand that there is a world out there that is largely ignored, left out of all the conversations, left out of all the negotiations that make up a significant part of the city. And in order to tackle the issues that Atlanta needs to solve, every city needs to solve, this country needs to solve, you have to at least respect the fact that there are different life experiences out there and different realities. And then we can have a conversation. I can't bond with all of you in this period of time to have this kind of conversation, but I want you to at least respect the fact that Larry and I are up here, we've been around a long time. If we're saying this, at least trust that there is a way to collaborate to address and solve real problems. That's where we are.
So just pause for a second on what Egbert just said. As we were getting ready to walk down here, I said, you know, I don't know exactly what you're going to say, but we talked enough that I know the points that you want to make. And I said, isn't one of the funny things that if I'd said the same thing that the white people in the audience would have heard it different, probably? Probably wouldn't have initially gotten as defensive. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just the way we are. You know, I remember, Egbert, when we first talked about this, you know, the inner side of, are you saying I didn't work hard? You know, are you saying I didn't work 14-hour days and bust my tail, you know, and da-da-da-da-da? And then I remember one time we were talking and you said, yeah, Larry, no, you work your tail off. But if you've done every single thing the same in your life and your skin was black, you think it would have worked out the same way? And it was like, don't feel guilty. Nobody, when they talk about starting the race ahead of someone else or having an unfair advantage, don't personalize that. Don't say, are you accusing me of? I don't think people are intentional, or very few people are intentional. But we're all the product of what we grew up with. We're all the product of the input that we have. And the basis of our friendship, which I'd say once again, I don't think would have happened if we hadn't started out with, you know, a common task to do that was very tangible, is that I was able to learn that the conversation of that message, that isn't about, you know, Larry, you did it. You know, Larry, you need to feel like crap, you know, because you did it. But the message also isn't, gosh, I look forward to going back to work, or one of my funniest things that, once again, I think I was pointed out as saying is, don't justify it because you can say, I have a black friend. This is a systematic thing, and, just to take it to something tangible today, that this wasn't the direction we were going to go in, but, there's a, I think, Bill, you described me as a part of the Buckhead elite. I did grow up, live most of my life there. I actually live in Druid Hills right now, but that's just to be near grandchildren. But listen, has during this pandemic Buckhead had a crime problem that's really awful? Absolutely. Any justification for it? Nope. Has the whole city had a crime problem? Yes. Is there blame to go around? Sure. But I worry in our society today when we concentrate, on, as you say, the 80%. If the easiest trap is to say, okay, we're leaving, that'll fix it. We'll control our own destiny. Are you kidding me?
We know heaven and hell can coexist.
Yeah, I mean, come on. If you put a police person on every single corner in Buckhead with gun drawn, then an arrest is, it's more complicated than that. What life circumstances is feeding that pipeline of people that don't feel like they have a chance. That requires work. That requires effort. That's hard. That takes decades. You can't fix it with a campaign slogan. Where are you going to put them when you arrest them all? How are you going to get the judges not to put them back out on the street? So it's so easy, all of us, to take that visceral reaction. I'm going to fix it. We're going to leave. But the solutions don't come out of that. Solutions that come out of, man, we got some hard work to do. And one thing that is absolutely assured is, I'm speaking as a Buckhead person, if the people looking for the solution that are working really hard on it, if they all look like me and came from my background, what is our odds of hitting it on the point of making a difference? Ain't gonna happen. You gotta have the ability to sit down with the other folks whose life experience is different and be willing to hear and learn through that lens of the people that are experiencing more of the circumstances and not just the end result.
So Larry, so to that
So now
point,
you take it.
well, so I say I was lucky. The first 14, 15 years of my life, I lived in heaven on earth. Antigua was 60,000 people. Everybody was poor. So we didn't know any differences, wide differences, but it was heaven on earth. We had 365 beaches on an island of 108 square miles. You could walk down the street and steal mangoes off of somebody's tree and you could eat. So there was not poverty the way we know it. Everywhere I looked up and down the ranks, the people I saw in positions of power looked like me. Nobody told me I never was anything, am nothing, never will be anything. I grew up in that proverbial African village. It takes a village to raise a child. The adults looked out for the young people and so on and so forth. And we didn't have the race dynamic. We just had a class dynamic, okay? And it was an experience that was great, but if you're born in any one of the small islands, if you're going to school beyond high school, the islands aren't large enough to support a university, so you're gonna have to leave. And if you're from the English-speaking Caribbean, you go to the US, the UK, or Canada. And that's what happened. So we're a US family. Miguel Southwell is number 12 of 12 children. I'm number 9 of 11 kids. We were from that same little village, Antigua, and rival high schools. We used to kick their butts every year, but that's another story. But it was really heaven on earth. Why? Because poverty wasn't criminalized. What I've come to appreciate is in this great new world, in the industrialized nations, the advanced nations, poverty has been criminalized. And the punishment for being poor, God forbid if you're poor and brown or black, you're going to go to the worst schools, you're going to live in the worst communities, and your trajectory is going to be set like this before you even leave the womb. And to get it here or here is going to take huge intervention because the system we live in is jacked up. It really is. And so that's the challenge we have, is to be able to afford to every citizen an opportunity to get off of this trajectory. And to do that, you have to rebuild all the communities we have. You can't take the 2% or the 3%, you can't bus people to a good school. There are not enough schools to bus all the people that are living in bad neighborhoods or dysfunctional neighborhoods into good schools. Unless you go and fix the 95% of those neighborhoods that need fixing, you can't address the problem. And when I told Larry I was leaving Russell to start a company, the Integral Group, and we were going to introduce this model, we're going to revitalize urban America, and we're going to create these mixed income communities so you don't have a heaven and hell, and trying to have the world be built around heavens and hells, and the people who live in hell just have a hard life. We're going to create mixed income communities, and we're going to create a great school at the center of it, and we're going to early childhood development and this and that. And Larry looked at me and said, man, if you just started your own construction firm and we JV'd, we could go after a whole bunch of stuff. The Olympics were coming. He said, hell, you could make, Tommy, you can appreciate this. He said, you can make $10 million in the next 3 years. And I said, man, I don't give a damn about those $10 million. I'm going to change urban America. And what did you call me?
Communist.
Yeah. Larry said, you're a damn communist. You know that? Jokingly. But really, that's what the work is. And if we're not prepared, honestly, to try and see everybody have a shot at life by having the basic things that we all take for granted as essential building blocks when we come out the womb, if we don't think that should be available to everybody, then check out, because you're not going to make a difference. But if you think it matters, that's the work we have to do. Because the people we write off, we're going to meet them in a dark alley one night, because they will realize that there is no life for them in this world. They won't value the things we value in this room because they're not accessible to them. Those of us look like me that are not in that position, we're lucky, but there's no right way to survive. So I don't hold out a charge against those people that are trapped in what they view as hopelessness and act a certain way. That's the way they survive. I survived how I survived. And that's what you have to be willing to give, open up to, as the reality of the world we live in today. And there's no place, I can tell you, that's doing it well. And Atlanta was benefiting from some leaders that understood enough of that, understood that enlightened self-interest could bring us together. But what will really change the world, what would really change our city, was to spread that and make more of the community buy into that vision. And Atlanta was viewed from the outside as this great inclusive city with all this energy. We knew it wasn't all right there, but it was in the right direction. I do feel, as Larry alluded to earlier, we're losing our way. What we do when we run into hardship now is we balkanize, we isolate ourselves, and we say, here's what we need to do, and we let go of the grand vision. What we need is an energy to reestablish that grand vision, and assume that every neighborhood across this city should be a certain kind of neighborhood, and we need leaders, elected or stepping up, that actually embrace an inclusive city. Larry always said, Larry called me after the George Floyd incident, call it an incident. And he said, okay, man, so what does all this mean? And I said, you know, Larry, I'm not really all that worried about that police officer that killed George Floyd, that murdered him for the world to see. He's wearing a gun and a badge, and his knee being on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 48 seconds, or 9 minutes and 29, depending on who you listen to. The impact of that was almost instantaneous and terminal. Who I worry about are the people who have the same view of black life or the lack of value of black life. They don't wear a gun and a badge. They don't kill you instantaneously. Their knees are not on the necks for 8 minutes and 48 seconds. They are teachers in classrooms miseducating or destroying the self-esteem of our kids. They are medical professionals supposed to be giving you medical treatment. They're loan officers in banks. They're editors of newspapers. They are lawyers and judges and so on. They're in all walks of life. And their knees are on the necks of my children and my grandchildren, not for 8 minutes and 48 seconds, but for year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation. And their damage is a lot more devastating, a lot more far-reaching than that 8 minutes and 48 seconds. That's who I worry about. And they're out there and they're in all walks of life. So it takes a momentum to change that direction and that trajectory. And this group of people in this room have demonstrated a leadership commitment on civic issues, tough issues, and need to now find our North Star that we can all buy into to lift ourselves above the microscopic battles that seem easier for us to take on than to take on this very big or hard task of reversing the trends that have been established in history over an extended period of time. And not talking about it or not acting like it exists isn't going to solve the problem. We have long-term problems and we have short-term problems. We have created casualties that we have to deal with today. And they show up in very bad ways in our society in terms of our peaceful enjoyment. And we have long-term problems, which is to cut off the pipeline that's sending young men to prison, young women to public assistance, and destroying lives. And that's hard work. And when you're prepared to do that, let's talk.
Yeah, and, you know, so how do you view that, which, you know, if I didn't know Egbert and I would, yeah. You said I got 5, 3, 2. You want me to stop now? Yeah. So here's the point, and then we'll turn it up to see if we generate any questions. I think you should view that as a very optimistic thing, because you back that out and you say, okay, overwhelming, is it really that bad? Well, what Egbert did when I called him a communist was he didn't just talk about it and preach about it. He tackled Techwood Homes. How many in this room remember Techwood Homes? Yeah, bad place, right next to Georgia Tech. You know, built as a segregated public housing, is segregated white to start with. You know, and Egbert said, I'm going to figure out a way with Renee Glover at the Housing Authority. You know, Larry, screw the $10 million. I'm going to figure out a way to demonstrate that you can rebuild that community for the same people in a mixed income setting with schools, daycare, all the social services that impact, and change the trajectory of the people's lives that are in the public housing that are there because they lack a chance. There's a certain element that, you know, it's cheaper to have them there than in prison. You know, that element requires a different strategy. That was universally not something anybody was interested in. It tickles me. One of my heroes in life is Tom Cousins. Tom gets credit, and that he should. The amazing thing of Eastlake. Eastlake came after Techwood, which is now Centennial Homes. And thank goodness, you know, so did the villages at Carver, so did, you know, all that. So instead of just saying, look at all these problems, it was, okay, well, I want to demonstrate with the low of the low that if you start so that their children have a chance in the infrastructure that we all grew up with taken for granted, but they also have to sign a lease where they all of a sudden have accountability that they don't in 100% pure public housing, then they're going to be motivated and learn, and you can change their trajectory. Is it perfect? Heck no. But is it changing it? So what I hope that we've stimulated some folks is whether it's just jumping in a troubled school or when you're sitting around with your civic organization, you know, talking about a project, or you're thinking about who you're hiring next, who your mentors are coming into your company. You know, get intentional. It requires work. And it's there, but it's not quick. And you don't, I mean, goodness gracious, you ever gone back and look at the headlines that Ivan Allen got when he went and spoke in favor of the 1964 Civil Rights? The ultimate buckhead guy. He's revered now, but he wasn't when he did that. Remember how many white people were going to go to Martin Luther King's Nobel Prize? Till Robert Woodruff said, I think it'd be a good idea. Then everybody bought a table. So I hope you get some optimism out of that. We could talk forever. It's something I hope you see we feel passionately about. Man, you're a great friend.
Yeah. Why don't we have one question? I think we have time for one question, or if anyone would like to stand up and comment either way. Bill?
I was lucky enough to come to Atlanta in 1970 and was a banker, and I happened to be working at a bank where H.J. Russell got his first loan. And I used to have lunch with H.J. Every 6 months, whether he needed it or not. And my question for you is, what was the special ingredient that he had to have all the disadvantages that he had to be able to do what he did? He had a special ingredient.
Actually, HJ was going to be successful no matter what. HJ was cheap, so he knew how to squeeze a penny. He was an excellent judge of people. He absolutely understood. It's something I always wish I had anywhere close to his sense of judgment of human beings. And HJ was genuine. You know, you sit and talk to HJ, I don't care where you were in life, you had a hard time disliking the guy. So he cracked the scene doing work for Larry's father, for beers, for years. He got into the industry, and when the doors kicked open, where it was realized that the world wasn't fair and maybe black people should get business from the city and so on, too, he was already an established brand in terms of the quality of the individual. So he got a lot of those opportunities too. And I think he managed to leverage them well, and he was committed to building an institution. So a lot of us, I remember looking around the table and seeing 13 people. I was 27 years old. I was president of the company. There were 13 people around the table. HJ was on the other end, and everybody else were young black men and women that were running divisions of the company and so on, and doing things that I thought that was just how the world was, until I realized that was an unusual situation. So So we call it H. Herman Russell University today, but it wasn't. He was just working a lot of young, bright people for no money. But we were learning, and we could go out and do some things. So I don't know. It's not a single answer. I know that didn't directly put a finger on it. But he was just a remarkable guy.
Thank you. Egbert and Larry, your friendship is what this city is all about. And I know that you've inspired me and all of us to do the hard work that we have to do to make this city the best it can be. So thank you so much for your wonderful conversation today. Just a few, if you'll bear with me for a few quick things. I forgot to mention new member Mary Judson will be down front after the program. If you can come and welcome Mary, and please introduce yourself as she joins us as a new member. Also, a reminder to the board of Rotary, we will have our meeting across the hall in the boardroom, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week for our Rotary on the Road. Have a great week in the meantime. Thank you.